Hi, this is Ryan Jones with Serverless Guru. In this video, we're going to be covering how to abstract some of our configuration out into a config file. And then we're going to import that into our serverless.yaml file to kind of abstract some hard-coded values out of our serverless applications. So to do that, we're going to create a new folder. I'm manually doing this. You can do make directory. It's going to be called config, and then we're going to create a new file called config.dev.json, and this is going to have JSON inside of it, which is going to carry our default stage and region. So we can call this here default, and we're going to add stage, which we're going to set as dev, region, which we're going to set as US East 1. And so what you can do is you can also make this a YAML file, and you can import it the same way. I'm doing JSON just because I actually like it a little bit more for this purpose, just because I've done things where you generate JSON for a specific case, whether it was like a SQS policy, which is just an IAM policy, which basically gives something permission. So I've had to create this stuff before. For our purposes right now, you can play around with creating a YAML version of this, which would look, actually if we just do it, I can show you the difference. You can do config.dev.yaml, and then inside of here you can have default, stage, dev, region, US East 1. So it's the same thing, it's just in two different formats, and then we can import this in. So to do that, let's go ahead and look up the syntax just so we have it correct. Here we go. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to type that in here. So instead of referencing default from inside this file, we're going to actually say, okay, from our current directory, which is serverless.yaml, go to the top, which is // right here, // and then go to the config directory, which is here, and then inside of that, go to config.self-provider.stage. So if we go to the top, this is self, and if we go down to provider, this is the provider block, and then if we go down to stage, this is whatever flag we're passing in. If we're not passing in a flag, then we're going to be pulling out the default stage. So this would be dev by default, or it would be test or prod or anything else if we were passing it with a flag. And so then we're going to go to the .json file. So all this is inside of the parentheses is you're specifying the path. File is just basically what serverless recognizes this kind of command as. So it's basically going, go to this file and then grab some value from it. So we're going to say grab default. And so what that's going to do is it's going to look in this JSON file, find the default key, and then pull back all of these values. And then, since we pulled this back as default, we can then do custom.default.region, and we're actually referring to the region that we set out here. So this is nice because as we get further and we're creating more specific applications, if we keep this same method of moving hard-coded values out to this config file, it'll allow us to keep our code very clean and also reusable, which is a major benefit. So let's go ahead and confirm this works, and let's do a deployment to test at region US West 2. So it looks like we actually have something happening. So let's go ahead and so I hit Control C. Hit Control C, which basically stopped the application from continuing to deploy. And why I did that is because we hit this error, this serverless warning. This is a valid file to satisfy the declaration file config.test. So it's saying config.test because we passed in the stage test. So we don't actually have a config.test file. We only created one for config.dev. And the reason why we have different stage configs is because you may have a test database, a dev database, and a production database, and you don't want them all to share the same database information. And this also allows you to scope who has what information. So maybe the people that are deploying to test or doing things like that, maybe they don't need your production information, and so you can ignore that or not send it to them. But the application will still work, and they won't have to modify anything. So that's really nice. So let's go ahead and copy this actually, and let's create one for test. So in the config.test is the same functionality, and we're going to rerun this command, and now we should be able to get past that error and start deploying to that stage and have our default values set. So as long as no errors get thrown, that means that this is working properly. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to basically create a config.test.yaml the same way that we did this other one. So we'll copy that and we'll change this name, config.test.yaml, and now we'll go into our serverless file. We'll make that adjustment .yaml, and this should work the same way. We're basically just using an external YAML file instead of an external serverless file. So that works perfectly fine. What's also cool is that because this is being added into this serverless.yaml file, you can still reference things inside of this. So we could say name $self provider.stage my environment. So this would say my environment stage. So what happens is that this gets imported into this line here, and when that happens, it has access to self. And remember, self has all these different blocks. There's the functions block, the custom block, provider block, service block, and we can basically access the different data points inside of the self block because it's being imported here. So that's really nice when we're trying to do things like, let's say we have this naming convention where every name has the actual service name. So we can say self-service dash, let's say the provider.stage, and let's then say my app, or let's say app. Okay, so this may be slightly confusing as we look at it, because what it's basically going to come out as is my first app, which is our service name. Let's say our stage is dev, and then it's going to say app again. So this is basically just an example. Let's go ahead and actually make this name. Okay, so this makes it a little bit easier to understand what's happening. This stuff is being transformed into these that you see here, and that's because it's being imported into the serverless file. So I know I'm harping on this point, but it's good to understand that these things connect back together into one single file, and it's something that if you understand it now, it'll save you time in the future when you're trying to figure out solutions to basically solve problems that CloudFormation and the serverless framework don't solve. So the more creative you can get, the better I've seen in my own experience of getting past these obstacles about, okay, so I have this problem where this S3 bucket doesn't have permission to this queue. How do I basically give it permission when this is happening at this point? And if you understand what's working underneath the hood, then you have the ability to modify it in a different way, and it'll save you a lot of time of refactoring. So if you start down the path of creating this stuff without kind of this abstraction in mind, as you get 5 projects or 10 projects deep and you still have work coming up, this is where it gets really troubling, because now you're like, oh, I have to go back and refactor 10 different projects to basically implement what I've learned in my experience now. So hopefully I can kind of transfer some of my headaches to you early on, and that will help you save some time. All right, so I think this is the end of the video. What we've learned here is we've learned that we can basically have external files inside the config directory, which will handle app-specific information. As our app grows and as our serverless courses move forward or videos move forward, we'll be abstracting more important things like maybe like the database user or what a specific naming convention is, things like that, so that they can be reused across the app. But also, if we wanted to share this, they can basically change one file, and that one file will update for their specific use case. And then they won't have to change absolutely anything. They won't have to scan through your serverless file, your 300 lines or your 1,000 lines, and find that one value that's different and have to deal with errors. They can basically just add their values in, click SLS deploy, and they're good to go, and they're up and running. So, all right, well, this is Ryan Jones with Serverless Guru. I'll see you next time. Bye.